Easy now.
Easy now.
Hello.
Oh, I love it. I love it when we got guests on and seeing their reaction. Welcome back to another episode of the Drive Talk podcast. I have my co-host Petrol Ped to my right, and we have wonderful guests Steve Saxty to my left.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on, and thanks for coming quite a long way to come onto the podcast.
I just come because the weather's so nice here.
Yes.
Is our furthest travelling guest so far by miles?
Yeah, if we pretend that he's come here solely for the podcast, then yes.
Well, yeah, we were going to do that, Joe.
Oh, right, yes. In that case, 100%.
Yeah, and that's absolutely why I'm here for you too. Yeah.
Thank you, mate. Big commitments. Steve, it's awesome to have you on. We have talked a lot over the last few years, and we'll go into that a bit later. But I think I would like to start with who you are and what your background is before we come to the current day and talk about your awesome book set that's right in front of us here for the viewers. It's definitely worth checking them out on YouTube, just for the front covers alone. So fire away.
It's always danger when you ask people to talk about themselves, isn't it?
Not with you.
Yeah, very kind. Well, my background is I've ended up writing books, but I'm not a writer, and I've ended up writing books about design, but I'm not a designer. So it's really a 30-year journey from when I first saw a prototype Fiesta with my mum driving down the road, and I sort of fell in love with prototypes and secret cars, and it was a strange sort of elixir of excitement to see the future. And it's always sort of been with me, if you like, this whole sort of world of prototypes and future cars and design. And that naturally led me, because I was born, despite my accent, I was born in Essex. And so that's all I wanted to do originally, was work for Ford in design and engineering. I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. I had no level of imagination at a 14-year-old. That's all I wanted to do. And so that's what I did. And that's really where it sort of started, I guess.
Okay. And you're, up until very recently, you're best known for your Ford books. And in fact, our mutual friend, Jamie RS on Instagram, put you in touch with me. But the Ford books, the depth you went into those and the name you built yourself around making those books, how many years and what did that entail? And how exciting was that?
Well, I mean, obviously, when you start anything in this world, you kind of like no idea how difficult it is. So I sat there thinking, I'll write a book. And you have to remember, you have to get a book published, you have to get a book printed, you have to get a book promoted. I didn't think of any of that stuff. I thought, I'll just write a book. And to my amazement, from the first one I did, which was, we've just reprinted it, it's called The Cars You Always Promise Yourself. And it's the riff of the old Capri tagline. And I thought, well, I better speak to some publishers, and they all seemed to want the book. And I was like, oh, that's amazing, because you hear these stories, don't you, when people write a book that they can never get them published and all of that stuff. I thought, well, I've got what seems to be a good idea, but I haven't written it yet. And so I thought, well, I better write it. So I did it completely the wrong way around. And I wrote the book and then thought, I'll start settling on a publisher. If they all want to publish it, I now need to choose my publisher. It was a sort of straight way of like sort of suitors of who's going to publish the book. And I worked with Porter Press, who's a well-known and very good publisher of automotive books. And so they published my first book. And then it went from there, really, and it ended up as a series. So the Cars You Always Promise Yourself, the one we just reprinted, was, to my surprise, a hit. It was an RAC Book of the Year finalist, which, you know, when you start writing, you're kind of like amazed that anybody's going to consider your book for an award. And then COVID came along, and as we all know, you're kind of all a bit stuck at home. And I had so much leftover stuff from the first book of all these prototypes. And Ford had got closer and closer to me, and Ford's chief designer, Amco Leonhardt, said, we'll scan our entire design archive for you of all the prototypes, all the secret stuff across the decades. It's never been digitized. You give us the perfect excuse to do it. Would you like to write a book on the design of each of the cars as a sort of follow-up set of books? And I thought, well, that could be really cool, because I know from the first book, what everybody loves is the stuff you couldn't see, because we all love the secret stuff, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. And so I thought, well, this could be great as a series of maybe 1 or 2 books. So that's what I did. So it's called Secret Forge, that follow-up series, and they're just about run out now. There's only a few hundred of those left. And they were also massively popular. And it was fun just to then, with the first book, I did design, engineering, and marketing. And my background, and I didn't dwell on it earlier, but my background is design, engineering, and marketing. So I spent most of my career in marketing, in the car companies or in consulting or in agencies. So I speak each of the languages badly, if you like. And so as a consequence, I thought, well, why not write them equally in the first book? With the series of Secret Forge books, it was more around design. And I found that's my true love in many ways. There are plenty of books that give you spring rates and gear ratios and compression. But of course, we've got the internet for that. And most of the car books I've read, they tend to be a bit in the Haynes workshop manually sort of, trims on that. And there's a place for that, don't get me wrong, but the internet has also gifted that to the world and democratized it. And so what I really want to do is read the book I've always wanted to, or write the book I've always wanted to read, which is, like really getting behind the scenes. So that's really, I suppose, a bit self-indulgent, is to write the books I've always wanted to read.
Then it's not work, right?
I don't view this as work.
Yeah.
I get the luxury of hanging out with all the designers, hearing their secrets, hearing their stories. That's just a gift. It's lovely.
You introduced yourself and you said, I'm not a writer, yet you've written a book.
Several.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. What was at what point did you sit down and go, because I think there's that, who was it coined the phrase, everyone's got a book in them? There was, yeah. At what point did you sit down and go, I can write a book? And how did you even, having not been a writer, go about the process of, when you look through the books that we've got in front of us, which we'll come on to, there's an amazing mix of great pictures and stories and writing. How do you even start planning it out, thinking, I'm going to write a book, but okay, I need to do the research. The chapters are going to look like this, or the writing style is going to look like this, or the experience I want the reader to have. Where did that come from? Is that just suck it and see, or?
Well, I think I can say with hindsight, I'm comically lucky. So the first bit of luck I had was, for those of a certain age will know the name Mel Nichols, who used to be the editor of Car Magazine. And I'd known Mel on and off for years. So when I worked at Jaguar was used Haymarket, which were as the global agency for the in-house magazine. I'd known Mel before that. Mel was the editorial director at Haymarket. So I'd met Mel professionally in my consulting time and professionally when I was later at Jaguar. I came across him again. But then he retired. And I thought, well, I'll need an editor. If I'm going to do this book, I need an editor, because no matter what drivel I write, an editor can obviously improve it. And so I found him on LinkedIn. I hadn't had contact with him for some time. And I said, look, Mel, hope you don't mind after all these years. Could you recommend an editor? And I'm still bewildered that I'm going to tell you this story, because he emailed me back and said, well, I'd be honored if you'd let me edit it. And I thought, and for those, the journalists that review the books, they're always like, Mel Nichols is Steve's editor. And so Mel and I are on our, whatever it is, 6th book together. We're really good friends. We had dinner the other night. That's one stroke of good luck, if you like. And the other is the look and feel, because we all know that people love a good-looking book. And it was one of the guys that's at Haymarket that said, look, I'm too busy to help, but you should speak to Adrian Morris, who is my designer. And he's designed a book. So there's the 3 of us really that design, edit, and write. And we're a team now. It's as simple as, I mean, it has my name on the cover, I do understand, but at the end of the day, without those 2, those books would not exist.
There's something very tactile. I mean, we were talking before we started recording, I don't get that often chance to read now. I used to commute into work before I did YouTube. I went to train into London each day, and I had loads of time to read. I read, all the Lord of the Rings books and all the books I wanted to try and read, but I always buy hardbacks. I never buy a paperback book, because I like it looks cool on a bookshelf when you finish reading.
Yeah.
But modern day hardbacks have all got paper covers on them. They're just pretty boring underneath. What I love about your books is they're hardback, but they've got the most beautiful artwork on them, and they're just a real thing. When I'd be very lucky, you sent me the book that we've got in front, and when it arrived, and it weighs about 5 kilos, and you kind of get it out, and it's just very tactile, and you open the leaves, and there's like a smell of it's just a real experience, and you don't get that when you're reading an online article or a watching a video online anymore, and that's what I love about them.
That was always my hope, that it would have that special feel about it, but it's not. There's a guy called Giles Taylor who was actually chief designer of Rolls-Royce, but I worked with him at Jaguar, and he said designing premium takes a lot of, designing luxury takes time. It's just hard work. And the hours we spent on just choosing what they call the slip papers, the colour that goes inside the cover, you can just see that on the bronze one. Everything takes time. And you talk about the touch of it. That's a new soft feel paint finish that the printer came up with. So in days gone by, the printers would just wrap a piece of paper because they could always charge the publisher more. But of course, we all get a book and you take the piece of paper off because it gets a bit broken and torn, whatever. It was always good money for the printers, but bad for the publisher, bad for us as readers. Yeah. Now the world's moved towards these printed covers, but unless you use that soft feel touch, which is a fairly new finish, you don't get that premium quality. So I was insistent that we use that sort of finish on the covers there. So I'm glad you noticed it because it costs money.
I did, yeah. And I'm anal enough when I get a book with a cover, especially when I'm on holiday, I'll take the paper cover off, I'll put it somewhere safe, and then when I finish the book, I'll put it back on and stick it on my bookshelf, so it doesn't get sun cream or whatever on it. But no, they're beautiful things. As a coffee table book, they're like the perfect thing. Can we sort of delve down? I mean, I'm so new to the whole BMW thing, but I have been lucky enough to be at a couple of manufacturers' kind of archive places, their museums, and I've been to the Alfa Romeo one in Italy, and you walk around and you'll be walking around and suddenly see this car that you think, what's that? I remember seeing a 4C Quadrifoglio and going to the people that were showing us around, go, is that a 4C Quadrifoglio? Yes. You never made one of those? No. And there's a Spider one over there. What? So you must have seen some things in your time going around the various, whether it's Ford or BMW, that you literally just go, what on earth is that? And how did I not know that existed?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's just the joy of it. And there's one that seems to have been a big hit for people, and I was amazed that we got to do it, actually. So there's a car called the 2K2, and this was a project that was really its early genesis in the mid-90s. And in America in particular, BMW 2002 from the 70s was like hugely loved car. It put BMW particularly on the map in the US. So, globally too, but there's such a love of it, but it's a small BMW. So there was a couple of designers of different generations. One of them was Andreas Sabatinus, who became the chief designer of Alfa Romeo. That's why you probably think of it. And he had 2002s when he was a student. And his vision of, rather than do a hatchback, low-cost version of the 3 Series, they're always dabbling of what to do under the 3 Series. Why don't we bring back the 2002 for the year 2002 and call it Project 2K2? And as I got into this story, I thought, this is a really cool story because it all predates the first generation 1 Series. And there's a lot of romance in it with Rover, and they had to make a decision whether to make the car or to save Rover and all of that stuff. And I thought, I wonder if the car still exists. And I have a contact in, there is a warehouse, I won't say where BMW stores many hundreds of one-offs.
Yeah.
It's not a public thing to anybody, and it's a story I'll tell you offline of where it is and how it works. But the point is I have the contact. I said, have you by any chance got 2K2 still there? Because it was a running prototype. It was a completely drivable car, windscreen wipers a lot. And he said, yeah, let me check the arm. Yeah. He said, yeah, no, we've got it. It's on the 3rd floor, actually. And I said, wow. So I spoke to Adrian Van Hooydonk, the group chief designer at BMW. I said, you remember 2K2? He said, it's such a cool car. I said, well, do you think it's going to be okay if we put it in the book there? And this thing has never been in daylight. That's the amazing thing. It's never been outside because, well, actually, that's true. It was on the test track one day, but it's never been out since in 30 odd years. So we had it taken outside. We had it photographed for the book. And it was just amazing that we got to do that. So those are sort of things that not only did I discover things, we actually brought them out into daylight after 30 years in storage. I think it's kind of cool.
I remember speaking to you. So when did we first start talking? Would it have been three years ago?
Got to be 3 and a bit.
3 and a bit years ago.
Yeah.
We met in a seedy restaurant somewhere. Where was that, near Peterborough or something?
Some random, and we couldn't find anywhere to eat. Do you remember we
Couldn't find anywhere
driving around that 7 pubs to find a dinner? That's right.
Yeah, we sat down and talked about stuff. That was right at the early stages. But I remember at the time when you started going out to BMW, to Munich, and I want you to talk about how that all sort of started as well, because I know you have talked about it recently, but I do find that fascinating how it all lined up. But I went out there about a year before that, so it's probably 4 years ago, beginning of 2021, and I was at BMW M, and they showed me their secret underground car park there, and that for me was like, wow.
Yeah.
And there are some amazing cars down there, like the E90 Ute, like the pickup truck, and all the MotoGP cars from every year. Not too many of these cars, more like special cars like the MotoGP cars, or cars that we kind of did know about but never made it, or we've seen pictures of. So they were like, but for me, they were like, that was like level 10, you know. And then you're like, oh yeah, I know that, you know, I know that car park, whatever. But yeah, and then, you know, a few months later, oh, I've just been to this you know, the place you're just talking about, and my goodness, what's in there? You know, the 2K, all these amazing everything, and you just think, well, you know, but how many cars are hidden away out there? How much stuff is it? You know, you show so much of it in the books, which I just find fascinating. But being able to actually see some of these cars, touch them, and as you just said, see them out in daylight as well, because it's all very well seeing a car inside. And Ped and I do a lot of studio shoots, but it's not until you actually get it outside and into daylight that it literally does come alive then. And if it's always been hidden away, it's never really been able to live, has it? And so let's just go back to how you went from making incredible books about Ford, which I found interesting because you sent me one, and I wouldn't call myself a Ford person, but obviously, you know, things like the Cosy and various other cars, I just found all of that fascinating because I didn't know much, if anything, about design and how it all works and how it all goes about, and the way you all broke it down and described it all was really, really interesting. But how did you go from making books about Ford to making books about BMWs?
Well, I didn't start out intending to do another book on anything really. I mean, it was all set to sort of go back to a grown-up job, if you like. And but I love doing the Ford books because it's what I love to do is explain that world of what design is. Because I realize if you don't work in the industry, nobody really knows how cars are designed. And it's, you know, in disrespect to the journalists, but they don't know either because they've not lived it like I have from a product planning or advertising, or just lived and worked with the designers. Yeah. Why would you? I mean, it's a specialist, pretty by nature, secret world.
We can criticize it quickly and we can love it quickly, but we can't appreciate what's gone into the design and you know,
and the compromises. I mean, that's the thing, is so conversation maybe for later, but you're right. I mean, it's so easy to criticize.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite a difficult job to design a car.
Yeah.
But the way the BMW one started was it was quite bizarre. So it was I live in New York, and we have quite bad weather in the depths of winter, and it was really heavy snow. Like, you don't go out. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is a bad one. I'm not doing anything today. And the phone rings. And it was Harm Lagai, who was formerly the chief designer at Porsche. And before that, he was at Ford and the designer of the Sierra Cosworth. And he rings me up and he says, Steve, it's Harm here. And he's very distinctive voice, and it was quite clear. And he's, I've only got 20 minutes. I've got a pizza in the oven. And I'm like, it's like 10:30. I'm like, why are you eating pizza at 10:30 in Germany? It's strange. And you're not ringing me for cooking tips. And he's Dutch, and they're really direct, the Dutch. And he's not getting to a point where I'm knowing. He said, you should, now, he's ex-Porsche, I'm ex-Porsche. So I glossed over a bit, but my background is, apart from consulting, I've worked for Ford, Mazda, Porsche, and Jaguar. And he said, you should write a book on, and I'm just expecting to say Porsche. He said, you should write a book on BMW. And I thought, well, that's so strange. We actually just bought a new BMW at the time. And I said, okay. But that's curious because Adrian van Hooydonk, the group chief design director of BMW Group, just bought my books a few weeks ago. He said, yeah, I know. He said, I had lunch with him last week, and he's very keen to talk to you about doing a book on BMW design. And so I thought, BMW design, there's not a shred of a book on BMW design. And I thought, this could be amazing. So he said, so if you're willing, you should write him a letter. And I'm of a generation, I'd like to think we all are, that probably are online, that you just send an email. You don't write letters. Yeah.
Patrick probably doesn't even know what a letter is. Pat, you ever? No?
A letter, for those as old as Patrick, you print it out on a piece of paper, put it in an envelope, and then
sign it.
Put a stamp on it.
Stamp on it, which stamps are very expensive.
Oh, no, they are, right?
Well, luckily I had, because it was snowing, I didn't even have to buy the stamp. There's one just sitting around because we'd never use them. So I phoned a friend who used to work at BMW. He said, oh, no, Adrian's so senior, you've got to write him a letter. You can't email him. Now, he's bought the book. I've got his Gmail address. I could easily have emailed him. There's no big deal. And so and because the snow is so heavy, I thought, well, I'm not going out to the post box. We've got a letterbox in the bottom of our building in New York. So I posted the letter. I thought, this is never, ever, in a month of Sundays, going to find its way across the Atlantic to Adrian Van Hooydonk's desk. Well, 6 weeks later, I got a letter back, and his admin had PDF'd it. He signed it and everything. He wrote me a formal letter back, and he's like, sorry, I haven't had time to reply earlier. I've been giving this a lot of thought.
So you had a letter back. It was a PDF, and it was emailed to you.
Yeah, the letter was scanned and emailed to me. So I still have it. So I have the letter. I should print it off. And so I got the letter back, and he said, so if you'd like to, we could have a talk by Teams for 30 minutes. Blah 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 blah. I thought, now you got to remember, he's a really senior guy. So what do you say in 30 minutes? I'm thinking, I actually should listen, not talk. So we get on the Teams call there, and the first thing he says is, why on earth didn't you just email me? And with that, it sort of broke the ice for our friendship and relationship ever since, because he's got a really good sense of humour, and instantly put me at ease. And that 30 minutes was an hour and 10. And I thought, how on earth I end up, and people always say, how on earth does Adrian find all this time to talk? And he's really good with his time. And so we talked for an hour and 10 minutes, and this was still the depths of COVID. I was still finishing one of the Ford books, so I sort of had to wait, really, before I could finish it and get going on the BMW books. So, but they were terrific out the gate. And the deal we struck between us was, he gave me every access I wanted. There was no filtering. There are like 5 paragraphs that have been changed, and it's not at PR's request, it's Adrian's suggestion just to change a few paragraphs. Those books are, you could ask for no more cooperation from a company, and their sensitivity is they're so creative that they didn't try and change it. They respect it as a piece of creativity. I'll give them full credit for that.
Yeah, because they're not paying you for these books. They've just given you absolute full access. And again, I think some of the stories we've talked about on the phone, and you just saying how open and giving and willing they were, to the point that I get the feeling that everything's so secretive, right, in that world, that they can't even tell their partners. They're there in this secret world. When they leave work, it's like being a spy or something. Yeah. You get on with your life, and so for someone like you to come along, especially later on in a lot of these guys' careers, and they've got all these secrets and all these things that they're probably dying to talk to someone about that's interested, i.e. someone that's writing a book about it. And so they're suddenly like, what? 1 sec, I can talk?
Yeah.
Am I allowed to talk to him? Yes. Right. And then, and that's it. It's literally just, and then you're there going, whoa.
It can be like that. I mean, sometimes you do them face to face, sometimes you do them via Teams on the computer.
Yeah.
It's exhausting for us both, because people get so excited, and I try and limit the conversation to an hour, because everybody's so excited, so enthusiastic. And there was one guy I remember who he's the guy that does the proportions. So in car design, there are volumes, proportions, surfacing, and detailing. So there's 3 pillars, if you like, of design. And this is the guy that sorts out the proportions, the basic package of the car. So he does all the future stuff. So he's usually working about 7 years ahead, something like that.
Okay.
And
so proportions, you mean got the nose, the body, the rear end,
the length of the bonnet to the height. So so the various proportions of the three boxes, if it was a saloon.
Yeah.
Right? And he has this proportionometer, only a German, and they've measured every car, and they can work out. There's rules in art of golden triangles and all sorts of things, and square. And I won't go to that, but basically they know what perfect proportions are. Curiously, some of the Teslas have got very good proportions, but not necessarily surfacing and detailing. You see, that's the point.
So they're packaged well.
They're packaged well from a visual proportion standpoint.
Okay.
And then the subjectivity of the styling, but the basic proportionality.
Yeah.
So
Joe loves Tesla, so he's a big fan. Yeah.
That's why I was keen to talk about design rather than dynamic. And so this guy says to me, I had to check with Adrian. Nobody's allowed to talk to me. He said, I don't even tell my wife what I do. and 2.5 hours later, I'm exhausted, and he's willing to carry on, and he's got his proportion. He says, look, I can show you the proportion of this future car to that car, and I can show it relative to a 3 Series from 20 years ago, and I can show it relative to and so he's got all these proportions and all these rules, and he said, and that's why I can guarantee to you that our next car, the proportions will probably be the best we've done in 25 years.
Wow.
And
it's a big statement.
And they are buzzing over there. I mean, there's a certainty of their future now. And but the point is less that, I suppose, in some ways, that just once you give them permission to talk, they loved it. I mean, everybody's been so trusting. I mean, they're amazing. They really are.
Just a quick question on that, going off topic a little bit. So you mentioned Tesla packaging and so on. I'd love to know your view on, they were a fresh sheet of paper company, right? They had no legacy to go off of. We'll ignore the first car that they produced because that was just an electrified Elise, basically. So if we go from Model S, complete blank sheet of paper, they almost invented a new architecture for a car. The whole skateboard, motor at either end, gives lots of internal space. It seems that some of the legacy manufacturers still have a hang-up. They still kind of design cars in a very similar way. There's a big space up front where the engine would be, and even in an electric car, it's still full of stuff, whereas Tesla have got a boot there. And do you think that that's almost taken the legacy manufacturers a while to sort out how to build electric cars?
Having seen a Tesla torn down, it's more radical in a teardown than I ever believed. I mean, it is right the way through a Tesla. It's like unlike any other body shell. I mean, the glass and the windshield on one of them goes right the way further down because it doesn't need not to almost, and therefore they're saving on the tooling and stamping, and just the construction under the skin of a Tesla is really radical. But of course, they didn't have the legacy of doing tooling the way the existing manufacturers do. They didn't have the stamping. They had to think differently because they were a startup. I mean, we forget this, right? But they were a startup, so they couldn't.
And they were only like 8-10 years in, I don't even think.
No, 10 years.
Yeah. And so they just had to think differently. And goodness me, I mean, whether we'll respect Joe, but he like him or not, we'll give him credit for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, there's an element where they do think differently. I mean, there's pros and cons as well with Tesla because, I mean, there's some of the quality issues. And
they're not built great, but
yeah, but they're built differently, right? I mean, so, we'll wait in judgment 10 years down the road and how they last. But with the best one in the world, it was nice to see a disruptor in the industry, I think.
Yep.
But do you think that the legacy guys are kind of getting there now? It seems to me they've just been very... If that's the world we're going, we could have a whole podcast on whether we should be going that route. But at the moment, electrification is the way we're going, and I'm sure we'll start talking about the way BMW are doing that with Neue Klasse and so on. Do you think they finally sorted it out, or are they still got hang-ups about the way it's always been done?
I think it's human nature. You tend to go to what you know. But it doesn't mean to say that Tesla's right and everybody else is wrong. So there's a difficulty here in not sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater in the argument, because what you've got with a conventional vehicle is a lot of repairability possibilities. Mm-hmm. You've got flexibility with some of the tooling and stamping. So, looking at your M3 wagon over there, Joe, you can do low-cost tooling to do a rear wing and things like that. So that it does not mean one is right and one is wrong, in truth. And Have they caught up? I guess you've got to look at the bill of, so I mean, in the industry, you'd look at BOM, the bill of materials, right? So the question there is, what would the BOM teardown be of a Tesla versus, pick on BMW here, any competitive vehicle. And that's where the proof of the pudding would be in terms of where the Tesla's achieving a lower BOM of bill of materials versus competition. I'd have to ask somebody I don't know the answer at this stage, but I'll ask someone and find out what their BOM is. But that's got to be the test at the end of the day. Isn't doing it differently for different sake isn't as important as making money. And remember, Tesla didn't make any money for an awful long time.
Yeah.
I think it also, we talked about it on the last podcast, depending on when these go out. But I think for manufacturers, we talk about this a lot. It's a very difficult period for manufacturers in general. And that would definitely include the design, in the way that although we know or we think we're going in the electric route, that has somewhat now been stretched out, hasn't it?
Totally. And
so you look at, and I'm not just saying it because you're on and we're talking about BMW, but I personally think BMW have handled the situation better than the majority of other German manufacturers anyway, in the way that they produce some good electric cars, but they've also kept the majority of their combustion engine cars, and they produce a lot of very good hybrids, and they offer all three. You don't feel like you're being forced into just an electric car that will probably at the moment not depreciate badly or whatever else. BMW have somehow managed to, well, not somehow, that the timing with some of their model range is really good, but I get the feeling like the 5 Series, if we went back 3 or 4 years, the current 5 Series was probably, I don't know, you might know this better than I, but I'm guessing it was probably designed more to be an electric only. And then as we got closer to that time, they've recognised that actually we're not ready for that. And thankfully it had the architecture to enable to put a combustion engine in it or turn it into a hybrid and continue on. And I think that's kind of going off what you're saying there, Ped, about the sort of the EV only structures. You look at something like a Taycan, which is an e-tron GT, and you're stuck with that car. And I know, it's been not a great seller for Porsche. It's been an awful seller for Audi. And they can't do, can you imagine what that would have cost? I know they've been testing that since 2015, Mission E or whatever. And, it's an amazing bit of kit, but it can't be anything else. And I think I can imagine from BMW's point of view, it must be difficult because they have to kind of keep their options open and not throw everything into one basket. Because look at, I don't know, Jaguar and a few other.
Jaguar's a good one because they give a statement, 2025 EV only.
Yeah.
Well, we're in 2024 and 2025 is a couple of months away.
Yeah, and EV sales are going like that.
Still only got one EV.
Yeah. Yeah, but that must be hard from that must be hard from a design. And I know, you spend a lot of time, you understand that side of the world. It must be really difficult for a brand to set up years before, because the cars that when a G80 hit the road, how many years before that? So what did they came out in 2021? Yeah. When would the design of that started happening? When would they have started?
I mean, it gets shorter for sure. So, I mean, roughly 3 years. Sometimes you can squeeze it to 2.5 with some of the Chinese. But you've got this awful long tail of, if it's a new product concept, there's a lot more imaginative, creative, free thinking before you start committing to. But for something like a replacement for, whether it's a regular production car or a more luxury product, doesn't really matter, I suppose. But yeah, you're looking at around about just under 3 years at the moment.
Okay, so I thought you were going to say 6 or 7, but I suppose that was 20 years ago.
But here's the thing: is that's for the car. The bigger issue, which never really gets considered in the press, is powertrains. So powertrains usually need a longer lead time because you have to invest just as much, sometimes more, if you need a gearbox factory, or if you need an engine capacity, and you've got to. Because the tooling for an engine is really expensive. It's boring as hell, don't get me wrong. Nobody gets excited about tooling for an engine block. But they're big, heavy cast iron assemblies that need big, heavy foundry work. that requires a lot of lead time, and you've got to do shipping logistics. So daft as it sounds, a bit like my books are really heavy to ship around. Engine blocks are really heavy to ship around. If you make those engines in the wrong place and you find that your volume is being made in Mexico and the engine's made in Germany, for example, all your cost base goes upside down because you've got to ship them over, right? So that's the stuff where the decisions that would be made for some of those vehicles are into market now were probably made 8 years ago, and I'd be terrified in some of those decisions that were made 8 years ago that would have been upended by the rush to electric 4 years ago and the issues we're seeing now, and the logistics side of it, the boring bit, if you like. That's where the terror is going to be, I think, for some people in terms of cost base.
Talking about cost base, I was with Dacia last week with one of their cars, and they had the designer, and they were talking about their design philosophy, and they have this thing, I think they called it cost-based design. So when they're designing a new car, so when it was the Bigster, their new C-segment SUV, and the first thing they decide is what the sale price is going to be.
Yeah.
Right, and then they work backwards from that. So everything, component choice. So they're like, so what dampers it's going to have, everything is based on how much it's going to be, and it's so that's how they end up with a car that's £30,000 comes to market. Whereas I guess for some manufacturers it's the other way around. They do everything, and then it ends up costing like 3 times as much. Well,
actually, you remind me of a really good story I got. There's a guy called Thomas Plath, and for the Ford fans, he was the designer of the RS 1700T and the XR4i. For BMW fans,
with the two wings on it.
How much? I wonder how much downforce those wings ever made.
don't look too close.
They look good though.
Yeah. But for BMW fans, he was the head of interior design and then advanced design. So all the X Series car came there under his studio, and he led interior design. So he's a talented designer. Quietly the number 2 at BMW design for many years, but not one of the names. So not one. But I'm quite friendly with Thomas, and he gave me a story. He, like a lot of the designers, joined BMW from Ford in the 80s. So I've actually continued a lot of people's career that were in my Ford books have carried on into the BMW books, funny, and Thomas is one of them. And I said, well, what was it like when you joined BMW? He joined in 86. He said, well, it was amazing. He said, the place was run by engineers, and they didn't seem to grasp that their job was to make a profit. They just, and so he told his story. He did this speaker grill, and he said, well, we can make it in plastic and it'll cost about this, or we can make it in metal. But if we just covered it in foil and it's at the rear thing, it's on the rear door. But he said, I reckon we will save, probably a couple of dollars sort of thing. And the engineer says, Mr. Plath, you don't understand. We're BMW. We will make the car as good as is possible, and then we will charge the customer appropriately.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And Thomas said, I'd never been in a conversation where I was told that actually we'd just make it as expensively as we could. Now, obviously, they've learned along the way, right?
Yeah.
But those are the sort of stories I love to sort of bring to life, because that cross-pollination, particularly because there was I have a particular heart for the design team that went to BMW in the 80s, because it was the Ford design team. They were the stellar design team. I mean, they went on to be the chief designer of Aston Martin, Jaguar, Porsche, Renault. They were a stellar design team, and most of them went to BMW, and they really reinvigorated, and BMW learned a lot from having a design team that understood the commercial side of the business, which is make it as good as you can, not as cheap as you can, just as good as you can. And as good as you can doesn't make it as expensive. Good should be a balance, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it's great. We've made the most expensive car in the world. Oh, no one's bought it, right? So, and those stories of BMW cross-pollinating is fascinating, I find. So one of the things that the designers particularly love is having Rolls-Royce and Mini in the group. And the reason is they often rotate across the brands. So recently, Domagoy Duque moved from BMW brand to Rolls-Royce brand.
Yep.
The junior designers also rotate through, and the modelers, the clay modelers and digital modelers as they are now, they're all encouraged to learn how to do a BMW and a Mini and a Rolls-Royce, because it keeps their design chops, as the Americans say, sharp, because they are not just slavishly just got one brand in their head. And they found that to be really good for keeping them creatively fresh. The designers understand intrinsically what is a BMW versus a Rolls-Royce versus a Mini. It's a luxury brands often don't have, but they believe in it wholeheartedly, and that's why perhaps in some ways Mini has got so much quality in it because it doesn't. Every time I drive the Mini, it doesn't feel like a BMW.
No,
but it sure as hell doesn't feel like a cheap product.
No.
I'm a big Mini guy.
Have you been in some of the latest ones?
It's great, aren't they?
Yeah, really cool.
Yeah.
Really, really cool.
And I'm gonna. We've got that recorded.
No,
Joe's been complimentary about Mini. This is.
Yeah. I'm only doing it because Steve said no. You know I love my Minis, not as much as you, obviously.
So I've got another question because I've got so many things I want to ask you. So next one I want to ask is there such a thing as a design that is too much ahead of its time? Or and for me, that instantly when I think BMW, I think i3 and i8. Mm-hmm. For me, i3 is one of the coolest, best, especially the range extender version, EVs that's ever been made.
Still today.
And you look at one now, and it looks like it's just rolled literally out the design studio, and it's 10 years old.
Still looks like the future.
Yeah.
Those two. Firstly, I guess the nomenclature's disappeared. We don't i3 and i8. You know, it's almost like BMW did them and then just stopped doing cool, funky cars.
Well, it's too early.
Is it too early? And
it's such a the whole story of the i project. I had to. It could be a book in itself, and I had to sort of watch it. At one point, I was writing a sort of sub-book of the because they're still in love with those two cars, the i8 and the i3. And it's why the vision efficient dynamics is on the cover of the book there, and that's a cool story in itself. I wanted to tell of how they turned what was a one-off concept car. It was never intended. There was never intended to be an i8. It was never in product planning. No vision of making that car whatsoever. It was purely because that show car, the vision efficient dynamics, was unveiled, and the CEO was in the bar one night, and everybody was congratulating him and saying, Mercedes with their SLR Roadster and like so old school V8, you must be so pleased. And he said, yeah, and we're going to make it. And people back in meeting, oh shit. And the engineer that did all the package engineering on it, and he was phoned up, and it was the day before Christmas. He said, his boss said, they want a running prototype in 6 months. He goes, it's just not possible. That's a whole new architecture. I can do it in 9 months. They say, you got a deal. And he said, and I was so stupid. I should have said 12 months. And so there's a romance in that whole story, and particularly with i3 as well, where they had a completely different design for the i3. And it was not necessarily going to be a BMW. It could have had a Mini brand on it, could have been its own brand. They really kept an open mind. They were as forward-thinking as Tesla in terms of what they thought i3 could be. And in the end, i3 and i8 sort of synced up in their design language. But your point, really, Ped, is were they ahead of their time? Yeah, because they bookended small car market, sports car market. And actually what we hadn't ever worked out was the obvious, apart from the bookends, is the bit in the middle, which is the mass market, right?
Yeah.
And because back then they were so ahead of the game, and they did it in such a BMW way. You could argue it's over-intellectualized with its carbon body and all of that stuff for i3. But, super, super lightweight. We're not in the age of lightweight cars anymore, that's for sure. But, yeah, they love that car, and they still love it dearly now. The designers and the engineers look back to that Project I, as it was called. It was ahead of its time, sure, absolutely.
Because I guess you've also got to have... So the design team will come up with something as revolutionary as that. You've got to have a board that goes, yeah, we'll sign that off. I guess for me, the other one, I was out with Renault early this year with the R5 team, and we got to spend quite a lot of time with them. But that all kicked off because the new boss walked into the design office and saw a concept that they'd made a couple of years ago, and went, "What's that?" And they went, "Oh, we're just playing. That's what we think a new Renault 5 could be." And he went, "Make it," and that was, and they had the backing from the senior team. And that, for me, that's a good example of a concept car that pretty much went into production. You look at the two, and there's very little between them. So the next question is, when you're talking to designers and design teams, how frustrating must it be for them to come up with some really cool design, and then when that car goes into production, there are so many rules and regulations and things that kind of distill what the original design is into what becomes a production car.
Well, that was actually something I wanted to get to, is what it takes to turn a show car into a production car. So that's in the Hidden Gems book there, which is what is the packaging issues we talked about? Actually, what are the compromises for what they call legals in the trade? Because i8 had its own bespoke platform, to my surprise, if I'm honest with you, they said, it wasn't that difficult actually. But when you get in the show car, the seats don't go up and down and move. There's no packaging for the air conditioning unit, so everything has lots of space. And they have a slightly cartoon feel because they need to look bigger on a motor show stand. And also, the surfacing is not refined, and it's a difficult conversation to talk about surfacing. But surfacing it when it's done well is really elegant. And I'm looking at a Volvo over there, and I can see some not so great surfacing on it. Yeah,
that was a Kia.
Oh, is it Kia?
Kia, that's my car.
It's Ped's long termer.
Well, so
say what you're going to say.
Lovely Ped. But
I'm just taking a picture of it there before it goes back. Yeah.
The thing is surfacing takes a long time, and some companies do surfacing super, super well.
Yeah.
And some companies do not. I mean, Kia is actually very good. That's not one of the latest.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Okay.
That's the new Kia.
And so the ethos of where the design goes is really down to a little bit what you're given as your raw ingredients. And so i8 probably came out really well, really pure, I think. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why we love it now is it still looks
like a concept car, right?
Because it pretty much was, So it's and I know when you look on Facebook, they're moaning about whether it's grills or whether it's lights and stuff like that. Life is full of compromises. I'll give you one story. Is Calvin Luke is the designer of the touring coupe, the BMW Z4 wagon concept. So they were really, really keen to make that.
Yeah.
A close, by my understanding.
Very, very
a little birdie might have told me.
Yeah, very close, very close. And so I was talking to Calvin about it. I said, well, how come you've got such a beautiful, voluptuous rear on that car? And he said, yeah, well, for a production one, that's kind of like, I said, is it aero? Or did you have to sort of pull that? He goes, no, it's actually repairability. He said, you get dinged if you've got the vertical face of the hatchback is close to the bumper, because in parking it can get impacted, and the repairability cost would be so much higher that when they do the assessment of repairability, it would cost a new tailgate as well as a bumper. So we couldn't necessarily do that shape in a production car. We could probably do it on the touring coupe, but on a production car we wouldn't do that just because of repairability costs.
And that would bring up insurance costs, which would then make the car less affordable.
And your lease, any number of things, because in some markets, repairability costs affects lease costs and all sorts of things. So stuff that we never think of, right? So it's not an aesthetic compromise. It's actually sometimes assembly compromise or insurability, down to repairability compromise, things like that. We'd never even think of out there in the real world.
Wow. Steve, can we talk a little bit about Munich? And the design studios? Can you just talk us through the sort of top secret world out there and what it was like? Just describe it a little bit, because you have talked to me about it. Obviously, you've not been able to take any pictures of everything, but you've explained it to me.
Right. Well, the good news is I had the entire design team. There's a photo in the book where they're in the viewing courtyard.
Yes.
And so that's not secret. The photo's in the book, and it's the entire team, which is actually really cool to get everybody there. And there's a lady strung up on a fruit picker to take the photo of them from on high. So that viewing courtyard has overhead screens, so that if a drone's coming over, they can quickly close the screens. So, and it's called and that area is called the penthouse, and it's curious because nothing to do with it. I don't know if it's even going in the magazine, but it's actually because in days gone by, the studio was across the road and it had a view of the Alps. And it was not particularly big, not particularly glamorous, but because they've all got ironic sense of humour, they called it the penthouse because of the view. And the view was, and so that name of the penthouse. And I'd say, why do you call this thing that's top secret and like got no view? Why do you call it the penthouse? And it's because it's a legacy name from like 40 years ago. So there is a studio, a covered studio, if you like, and they've just redone it where it's all sort of a bit Starbucks and relaxed seats. So there's all these, previously about a year ago, these formal seats and all these famous names across the decades have sat in there across the industry viewing the cars. Now they've sort of turned it into much more relaxed, sort of Starbucksy coffee shop environment with these big digital walls. And there are rotating turntables as you get in these places there, and that's where the cars are usually discussed with the board. And that's also one of the things that surprises people. Get said, well, the board need to decide this. Is the board makes the decisions with the designers, and a lot of the time, it's not really the board. The board would include people that are not aesthetically, creatively qualified, but in BMW, the board is intimately involved in the product. And I thought that was amazing, because I kept hearing them talking about the board, and I said, you don't mean like Adrian senior management, you do mean the Vorstand, the board. And they said, no, the board will come in and do a sign-off on each car. And I was like, really? And so that's how maybe different they are, that the board is really there, and it's the whole board will sign a car off. So, but you asked me about what's the studio. So the studio, so when I'm so old now, I can remember the studios where you'd have like the clay models in the middle, and the designers would be around the edge with their marker pens that would smell of all this magic marker. You will get high on the sort of smell of all the fumes these pens would give off. They still have a central studio area, but the cars are usually covered, because of course people walk around with phones, but so it makes sense in this day and age, right? Because somebody casually shouldn't be walking around with a phone anyway, but in a secret environment. But the designers often work just as we do now at computer stations, so they don't have to be around the edge like they were in the old days. And then there's a really good coffee shop in the middle of the design studio, because of course all designers drink coffee all day long. So there's one of the best coffee shops in Munich is right in the design studio. And so the senior teams sit really on one floor, and the others are sort of strung about at various desks. And you can usually spot the designers' workstations, because they've usually got the cooler models sitting around. I mean, they just have cooler stuff floating around than the rest of us, I was thinking. And to get in, it's quite fascinating, because at the FITS, the Vorstand Innovation Centrum, if my German's halfway bad.
Which is that bit, is that near, to put into perspective, is it sort of near Welt?
Sort of.
10-minute walks. Well, everything.
Yeah,
sort of.
That's a good point there, Joe. Because most people seem not to know of the FITS, and I don't think quite rightly BMW doesn't necessarily publicise it.
Yeah.
But you can walk there, and I often do. So there's a hotel I stay at, which means I can walk to the four-cylinder building or to the FITS. So and it's 20 minutes walk in either direction, sort of thing, and that's right next to the M prototype workshop. You should stay at the hotel, because then you can see all the M prototypes.
Right. Yeah.
It's physically next door to M's prototype workshop.
Okay.
And that's the most random thing is there's prototypes, as you know, always just driving around in camo.
Yeah.
And so the FITS is just up the road, and I think it's something like 20,000 people work there now. I mean, it's huge. When I first went there 25 years ago, you can walk around it in 10 minutes. It takes you, it's got to be 20 minutes to walk from one end to the other. I mean, building after building after building.
The size of a big airport then.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
like Hong Kong or...
There are shops and banks. I mean, there are huge... the cafeteria... I mean, this is very BMW. The cafeteria, they're all BMW stuff. They don't outsource even their food. Other companies, they just use a catering company. No, these are all BMW employees do the food. But to get into the design, the department's called ED. And there are these... And it's an 80s building, but it's beautifully cared for. It's not like it's falling apart. I mean, they do care for this building. So it's got these wonderfully 80s rotating doors that slide around, but it's only one person can get in.
Okay.
And so somebody has to let you in, and then it goes shh, and it's like start behind you, and then you can walk through out the other side. You have to hope the other person's coming in, because you get lost otherwise.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's quite cool. You know when you're in Department ED, because the door has gone around you, sort of thing. So yeah, it's quite cool. Yeah.
Wow. And let's just talk about your cars or car. I know I think you still got your Capri.
I have, yeah.
It's not your average, and we want to ask you about the new Capri as well. Yeah. But your Capri's not a standard Capri, is it? And you actually took me out for a little spirited drive a few years ago, and which was
a spirited drive trying to get dinner, as I remember.
Yes. Yeah,
you got fast and hungry.
We both started getting hangry. It's like,
when I finished the Ford books, I sort of promised my readers I'd get a classic Ford. I thought it was only fair, sort of thing. And I've made the same commitment to BMW. I'll buy a classic BMW. So I asked my readers, And I've got a long background with Capris and things like that in the days gone by. But, I was open-minded. One of my readers who has several Ferraris and a huge collection of cars said, well, actually, I've got this Capri injection that's a factory or a dealer-fitted turbo from new. You can get a Turbo Technics, was a tuning company back in the 80s. They're still around, actually. But this was a turbo Capri from new. So it basically wants to kill you because it's so fast. And it's got 60s brakes on it. But it's a 99-point concours car, and I think it had done 800 miles in 12 years, and I did 1,200 miles in 6 days. I completely flipped it. So I did something like 30 years of motoring in a week in this thing, and it didn't miss a beat, I'm pleased to say. And I've never driven it since.
Oh, not since we've...
No. That week I had it, it's been in storage, and I'm just talking to somebody about storing it now so I can get to drive it again, because it sits in Yorkshire and I never drive it.
Yeah. And have you got any plans for... So and I know you're not looking at buying something ultra modern, but if you were looking at buying a modern BMW, what would you get based off everything, but maybe a little bit biased towards design? What's your favorite BMW on sale today in terms of design?
It's probably the one you're going to least expect. It's probably because it's such a romantic design that they really wanted to do it, which would be the 8 Series.
I thought you were going to say the XM then. The 8 Series. I would agree with that.
There's so much heart and soul when you talk to the designers behind it, even though they've left BMW now in one particular case, and he's very senior at a Korean manufacturer. He still has so much heart and soul for that car, and it's just a really romantic car that they didn't have to do it, and they just really wanted to do it. And I think it's a beautiful looking car.
Just needs pop-up headlights though.
Headlights.
Yeah, well, the original one had pop-up headlights.
That was you. Oh, the original 8. Yeah, of course it did. Yeah, no.
I'm a pop-up headlights kind of. Oh no, the A series is the most rapidly depreciated car in the UK.
Literally, the podcast we filmed earlier. Yeah, we're talking about depreciating cool cars.
There's a really nice one for sale. I'll send you the link.
Very nice one.
There you go. The trouble is, I tend to look at them, and that worries me. Well, actually worries my wife more than anything else.
Okay, yeah.
So before you go then, so you are a Capri owner.
But don't hate me for it.
No, not at all, because Capris are cool as, especially, and you've done all of this amazing writing about design. You're ex-Ford, you've done loads of stuff around Ford. Talk to me about the design process to come up with the new electric Capri.
So obviously, it's been a somewhat controversial thing in some people's mind. I mean, I've been somewhat privy to knowing how it kicked off behind the scenes. I mean, one of the things you got to appreciate is Ford has to deal with the hand it's been given, right? And the hand it was given was that VW platform. And it was a desire to try and add a sporty derivative to the range. And it was sold in to Bill Ford, but actually Jim Farley, I think it was sold into. And I've seen a presentation where it was, hello, my name is Capri. I've been away a long time, but now I'm back. And that was the premise of bringing Capri back, was to help bring back a sporty vehicle into the range. So it was a more than you might expect. It wasn't as cynical. It was actually something of a passion project. But I totally get that there's the world going, but Bodie and Doyle
went wrong?
Bodie and Doyle 2+2. I mean, it's not like I'm not ignorant of what people think, and I own one of them after all.
I think the problem is as well, this day and age, Pat and I were talking about this on a recent road trip, that as lovely as two-door sports cars are, or two-door anything, they don't sell in big enough numbers to make profit in this day and age. And what was that? The cheapest German two-door?
Cheapest two-door car that the VAG Group currently sell. What is it?
Yeah, the cheapest. That's right. The cheapest two-door car that the VAG Group, Volkswagen Audi Group, currently sell. We'll put that one to you, Steve. Do you know the answer to that?
A5?
Which one?
A5?
Don't make the A5 anymore.
Uh-huh.
The new A5 is now...
It's got to be VAG Group, so it's got to be a trick. I assume R8 is off sale, so it's probably going to be Lamborghini or something.
Well, it's not quite that crazy. I mean, Steve's gone right to the top. The cheapest. Ped, you should know this one.
Mini?
No, they don't do a two-door Mini anymore.
Oh no, that's Bad Group. Sorry,
What do they?
the wrong group.
Oh no, that's not. Yeah, well, it's BMW.
Sorry, yeah.
It's all-
Sorry, yeah.
Come on.
Polo, Golf.
No, they don't do it anymore.
Golf. Do they not do a two-door?
No,
Golf?
no. Two-door A3. Nope.
No.
TT. Nope.
I'm trying to think of a coupe.
Come on, Bad Group. Think outside.
That's why we've got to think outside the box.
It's not like an Amrock or something, is it? Like a pickup. It's got two doors.
I'll put you out of your misery, mate.
On it, go on.
What car do you drive?
Hey,
Porsche Boxster?
is it?
Yeah. It is, right? And the Cayman and Boxster. It's the cheapest two-door car out the Bad Group.
way.
Anyway, it's just a random. When Pat told me that, I was like, that cannot be true. But yeah, and I guess that's not that the Capri had to be a two-door sports car, but you can see the challenges. Look at the things like the Cougar was a flop, really, wasn't it? The original, was it the original Cougar? Is that what it was called? The Probe, and then that didn't sell well.
Yeah, the Cougar.
Yeah, so I guess you look at those cars and they're very niche specialist cars. So I guess it had to be.
I think the problem Ford are almost, for me, making a rod for them back by bringing back names that people love, like Mustang, and sticking it in an electric platform or Capri. And if they're going to bring back old names that people didn't really like that much, like Scorpio, maybe.
It's going to make them even less desirable.
Well, look, I mean, here's the thing: is all they've got is their history. These companies, and there's a danger with history, right? Is it can drag you back to the past. So if you look at Alfa Romeo or Jaguar, it's eternally locked in a battle between its past and its present and its future. BMW really understands its past and actually uses it a bit of a spur into the future, and I'll respect them for that. And it doesn't seem to get caught and trip itself up on doing retro.
Yep.
And you look at Neue Klasse, which is not a retro car, but it actually understands its past, and that's a really difficult thing to get right. Porsche totally understands its past.
Yep.
Totally gets its history, and it almost celebrates its history in some of its cars, and you love them all the more for it. But if you do it clumsily, or if you don't understand it on an emotional level, or you haven't got the right bones to do it with, it's kind of tough, really, in truth. And that's why. But it's not that impossible. Look at Renault 5. We all love Renault 5.
Yeah.
Out the gate, we love Renault 5, don't we?
Yeah, and Renault 4 is going to be mega as well.
Yeah.
It's just you see that, and you just as I said earlier on in the pod, I've met the design team that did that, and they all just obsessed about. The first thing they did was they got all the old different variants of Renault 5, poured over it, and went which bits of the design cues and things are we going to kind of carry into the new car, and they just did loads of them.
But done wrong, you'd have a pastiche, and that's the risk, right? So the danger is you use it as there's an old phrase in advertising called lipstick on a pig. And if you do that cynically, you end up with a compromise, in truth. And some of them get it right, but I mean, that's their differentiation. If you look at China, where there's so much stuff coming for China that's generically attractive, you could swap the badges on them completely interchangeably with a lot of the Chinese vehicles. Well, and nobody would care. You could do it in a heartbeat. But if you start swapping the badges between a Mercedes and a BMW, or a Kia and a Volkswagen product, clearly there's something wrong. That in itself shows that history, if you use it right, can inform your future. But goodness me, that requires some creative talent, and some have got it, some haven't.
Oh, it's been an awesome insight. I can't believe we're well over an hour.
I know.
I feel like we could sit here and talk for hours. And actually, Steve and I are going to sit and talk for hours in a few weeks' time. On my channel, we're going to delve into things a lot more. So keep an eye out for those videos, because I'm interested in hearing a lot more stories.
And we'll show some of the pictures as well, and give some of the secrets.
Exactly, some of the visuals. But big thanks to Steve for coming on. It's been awesome. It's been really interesting for both of us, because a lot of time we get guests on and we kind of, I don't know, you anticipate, or kind of what they're talking about, whatever. But in your field and what you do, for me at least, it's just been like an eye opener. But without sounding like too much of a cheap plug, I'm going to put a link to Steve's books in the description below. But obviously, just Google Steve Saxty, and scroll down to about the third page, you'll find him. No, you'll find his you'll find his website there with books available for sale. They are absolutely beautiful books, and yeah, I mean there are so many interesting stories in there, especially around the i8 story, or the efficient dynamics. That's what it was called, wasn't it? That whole, yeah, I mean that was fascinating. But the visuals for me, I'm a visual man, and some of the pictures, the petrol station one with the 3-litre CSL, that's still my favourite. But yeah, it's been awesome. Thank you very much, Steve. We appreciate you coming down, making the effort.
It was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, cheers,
Steve.
And thanks to, I don't know if we mentioned him.
We are
Podium
Roastery.
Place.
Thanks, Podium, for your hospitality as always. And don't forget, please subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Follow us if you're listening on a podcast platform. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram.
Yep.
Follow Steve.
Follow Steve on Instagram. And Michelin UK, of course, for helping make all of this possible.
We'll get coffee.
We should.
Like a plan.
Yeah, another one. Don't drink and drive, folks. Cheers.
Thanks a lot.